I've been organizing SheetsCon here today, and with me on stage, we have a very esteemed guest today, Martin Hawksey, the Google developer expert from Scotland. And now Martin has been at the forefront of Google Sheets and AppScript from way back in the day when they sort of first came onto the scene, these tools. So Martin is a real expert with both of these technologies. So I'm really excited to have him here today, and he's going to talk to us about the future. What do I mean by that? I mean, he's going to tell us how we can interact with our spreadsheets using our voices. So this is going to be a fascinating talk. Please put all your questions in the sidebar for Martin. I'm going to gather them up and come back in for a Q&A session towards the end. So really looking forward to this. Enjoy this talk. Thanks, Martin, and I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Ben. It's a real pleasure and honor to be part of the inaugural SheetsCon. Ben mentioned I'd been working in G Suite for a number of years. Actually, 10 years ago was my first blog post using Google AppScript, which I'll touch upon today. So I think it was the 3rd or 10th of March or somewhere around that time that I got started in this area. And so today I want, Ben mentioned looking at the future, and it's an area I'm really interested in. And I think there's a lot of potential, even for novice coders. I think there's lots of scope for you to do interesting stuff. So I'm also conscious that I have to follow Alice Keeler, who I'm a big fan of. This may be a slightly more relaxed and sedate pace, but hopefully I can keep your interest going. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. So my slides are going to be available as well. So there's a link on the slides, and I think Lexi's going to put a link as well in the chat as well with the slides. So the thing I'm interested in, I'm just going to make sure I kill all my notifications so you can get those. Let me let's see how we go on. I might have to close something in a second, but so now I can't lose focus as this, but go away. Don't you just love Windows? Chromebooks are far more easier. What I'm going to just do is I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm just going to move monitors around a bit, just so you're not going to get distracted. We'll get this in the edit, won't we? So we'll go there. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, my name is Martin Hawksey. So the thing I'm interested in talking to you about today is a voice first. So looking at how voice and conversational interfaces can be used, particularly around Google Sheets. So a bit of background about myself. So I actually work for an organization called the, too many screens. I work for an organization called the Association for Learning Technology. So this is a membership organization based in the UK. And one of the things I love about my job is we're encouraged as part of our profession to explore the kind of interplay between learning and technology. And I think if you saw Alice's presentation, you'll get a really good sense of what that's like. As Ben mentioned, I'm part of the Google Developers Experts program. So like Ben, who's also on the program, this is just a program where Google have brought together members of the community. So I don't work for Google, but I'm just a member of the community. And as Ben mentioned, it's something I've been doing for a while. 10 years ago, I wasn't really a coder at all. And I think there's a number of us that work within G Suite that have gone on this lovely journey of being very interested in the G Suite platform and what it can offer, and actually seeing the affordances of that platform go from a no-coder up, well, now I'm technically classified as an expert developer, which I struggle to come to terms with sometimes. But I thought it'd be useful just to find out a bit more about you guys. So there's a link there to a Google form, which hopefully you can fill in. So it's just a couple of questions. It just allows me to get a bit of background. And what we're going to do is I'm going to actually use the data that you submit just to show some of the things that you can do with conversational interfaces, even with no code. So I'm just going to, in fact, I think I can, yep, so I can see Lexi's put that link into the chat. So I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds so that you can start hopefully filling in responses to that. While you're doing that, I'll just continue on to the next part and we'll review that data in a second. So I'm just going to jump forward. So a bit of history. So I'm quite interested in the history of computer science and just how we've ended up with the systems that we have today. I think it's quite interesting to look back, and I think this is one of the things Alan Kay talks about. The present dominates, but it's looking back to the context where we're coming from, and then kind of projecting off into the future, trying to think the impossible. And back in 1968, Doug Engelbart and his team at NLS were doing just that. So they were really just exploring, how computing could be used to benefit public good. And it's quite remarkable. If you've never seen the Motherwell demos, I can highly recommend that you go and watch that. It's fascinating to watch what they were able to achieve in 1968. And there's a whole long list of world firsts that Doug and his team actually came up with. And one of those things was, the first mouse. And the mouse really enabled a lot in terms of computing. It facilitated the use of graphical user interfaces. But there was a whole host of other bits and pieces that Doug and his team were able to do with computing. But they were limited. There was only, in the 60s, there was only so much processing power that they could use. And so a lot of the systems that they developed, running on 1K is barely that. And computing power and just how our infrastructure itself is very different now. If you move forward, at SheetsCon, it's probably worth giving just a hat tip to VisiCalc, which was the first spreadsheet designed for personal computers. So that was launched in 1979. So this is where we get many of the things that we kind of work in our daily lives in terms of the grid reference system, the use of formulas, how cells can be a value and a formula as well. So all these things were established in VisiCalc. And there's a short video here which just shows Excel, which was kind of the next step in the development. So Excel was actually developed for the Macintosh first. We're talking 1984, 85. So this is when we first started seeing graphical user interfaces being used within spreadsheets. So today we're at a new kind of era, I see it. But it's interesting just to reflect, the dominance of spreadsheets within the world. So here are a couple of stats I was able to pull from a blog post by Himal Gillison. So I don't know how accurate these data points are, but I think it's quite interesting reading. So, for example, 1.2 billion people use Microsoft Office. So, the odds are that most of the, at least that people have access to Microsoft Excel. 1 in 5 adults in the world use Excel. The number of skills mentioning spreadsheets within job ads is 1 in 3. So Indeed is a job website. So what I'm really saying is spreadsheets really dominate our life, and they're used by a lot of people. So we're talking substantial numbers of people that are using spreadsheets on a daily basis. And I think it's interesting to consider with this, how do we interact with that data in the spreadsheet? So we've obviously had the graphical user interface that's dominated thanks to the mouse. But now we're in an era where our voice is becoming a new, and as the quote here says, a frictionless way to start interacting with our world. When you look at some of the stats around voice and conversational interfaces, it's really quite impressive. So, we now have a generation of people coming through who are just really comfortable with this technology. They expect to be able to talk to a device and have a conversation with a device. It's quite worrying the number of children that can potentially buy stuff with your Alexa speaker. Some analysts actually say smart speakers have been a bit of a Trojan horse, that really they've been used by companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft just to get technology into homes. So some analysts are predicting there's actually going to be a peak in the number of sales of smart speakers. But I think with this peak, it's not about the physical device anymore. If you look at where assistant type devices are going, they're essentially every appliance potentially can have a voice or a conversational interface. The fact that Google Assistant can be included in a whole host of other products, from your mobile phone, speakers, other technology can use it as well. I think it continues that trajectory of this is going to be an area that's going to be more part of our daily lives. So I just now want to kind of pause for a second and just think about, if conversational and voice interfaces are going to be part of our daily lives more increasingly, how can we as users of Google Sheets and other products start tapping into this marketplace and start developing stuff? So one of the first ones I want to look at is AppSheet. So I know Cleo Espiritu did a talk earlier today highlighting some of AppSheet. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about AppSheet development, but just to give you the headlines, AppSheet was recently acquired by Google Cloud, so it's now part of the Google family. And it's really designed as a no-code or low-code environment for you to start developing applications and interacting with your data. And one of the data sources that you can interact with is Google Sheets. So it's very easy for you just to, within AppSheet, point to your Google Sheet as a data source, and then you can quite quickly start building applications on top of that. So both reading data from your Google Sheet and also writing data to your Google Sheet as well. So there's a whole host of built-in features that you can use within AppSheet. So from capturing images, that is they have a new smart assistant. So this continues AppSheet's philosophy around a low-code, no-code environment, and it's incredibly easy to develop applications which are using your data in Google Sheets, but have a level of voice or conversational interface on the top of them. So what I think I'll just do for a second is I'm going to just swap screens. And so one I prepared earlier is, I can find my window. So earlier I asked you to fill in the form, and I'm very grateful that a number of you have done that. So I'm just going to pull the form in. So here's the form data you've all been submitting. And what I've been able to do is just quickly put together, so this is AppSheet's backend. So I've been able to just summarize some of that data. It's going to screw up some of the application screens I've got here just because of the zooming. So I can see from the data we've in terms of the Sheets users, I can, in fact, let me just refresh the data on this. So you can see it's a very intuitive, I think, interface to start developing stuff. I love the fact that you can see your results as you're developing. So in terms of the audience, we've got 57 people with intermediate. We've got some advanced users, and we've got some Ben Collin levels sheet ninjas. So just to quickly go through this interface, just to show how I got to this point, all I've done is add the data source, and I've used the Google Sheet as a data source for that. And then we can start building our UX. So I've got a series of views. So my Sheets view is just summarizing the Sheets question in terms of expertise. If I look at the code, so we've got quite a few low codes, some no coders. So no code has been used in putting this app sheet together. And one of the things as a pro user of app sheets is we've enabled an assistant. So it is a case of toggling a switch. And if you're on the pro account, you can start using assistant. So I'm going to just ask it to show me a map of Google Sheet ninjas. So on the form, we asked you some location data. And so I can see we've got someone in New York. We've got someone in Dallas. So through this interface, we can start having a conversation with our Google Sheet, which I think it's I think a nice step into this world in terms of being able to enable people to start working with data with their voice. But I still think it's like one step removed away from the delights of a Google spreadsheet. You've interfaced the data here, but sometimes you want to play around with the data in the sheet itself. So that's where we're going to go next in terms of looking at what you can do. So I'm going to show you a demo here, and hopefully this will work. When you start, if I just go back a slide, here we go. Helps if I click the right button. So what's happening here is I'm just loading a Google spreadsheet. I'm just going to hide my bar. So if you're familiar with Google Sheets, one of the things that you can do is develop add-ons, and that's exactly what I've done in this instance. Is I've created a demo add-on that now enables me to interact with my data using my voice. So here we've got a dump from my, I have a travel currency card, so hopefully you can see these cell values are actually strings, so it's a combination of a number and a currency symbol. And what we can actually do is a mixture of currencies. So, for example, let me scroll down to some dollar transactions. Let me give you a good mix. So what I can do is I've got my little demonstration add-on, which I'm going to start. So it's going to bring up the sidebar. And now we have our assistant that we can work with in Google Sheets. So this is a demonstration which will show how we can use our voice to start doing things like highlighting particular rows. So let me try this with my slightly croaky voice. Highlight rows where debits are greater than $30. Let me try that again. So highlight debits where values are greater than $30. At least my conversational interface is being quite kind to me. So I'm going to actually jump into typing just to help it along as well. And so you see what's happened here is it's been able to identify. There was a bit of a conversation around that, but you know, it perhaps shows its slightly humanistic side in terms of getting these things to work. So it's being able to interpret my intent and highlight the values here. And if you were tuning into the earlier session from Andy Rudd, you'll know that Google are just running out a feature which will now enable us to filter based on color and sort by color as well. It's a shame Google did that today and not last week, and then because I could now do something like that, but in the meantime, we just have to rely on Ben's existing example of how you can do that whilst Google roll it out. So just jumping back to slides, just to explain what's happening here. So what you saw was an example. So this isn't part of, it's not a kind of a Google feature yet, but hopefully one day it will be. One of the challenges when you start using any sort of conversational voice interfacing is you can go so far in terms of parsing the structure out of sentences, but you know, potentially it becomes a big, huge regex nightmare if you're doing this. But what we can do is there are services that actually can help us out with this. So one of the services that is available is a product called Dialogflow, which is also part of the Google family. And Dialogflow is it's another, I would say, no-code environment in terms of being able to set up virtual agents that can extract intent out of your conversations. In terms of actually processing that intent, that's where you do need to find a developer who can help you out. But the initial setup, so designing these things, is very straightforward. And perhaps in a second, I'll just jump in and show you an example. So, for example, we have a sentence here: I'd like to buy a book I would like to book a weekend in Paris for next month. And what Dialogflow is able to do using machine learning and various other magical things I don't fully understand, it's able to extract the intent out of these conversations and actually allow you to process that data. So here's an example of a screenshot when I was setting up the highlight row example. So what we do when we're designing our agent is we have an intent. So this is what you want to achieve. And we just start writing expressions that we'd use. So trying to think about kind of variations on what people might say in terms of the actions that they want. And we can actually start highlighting part of those sentences and identify those as entities. So these are the values that you want to extract from those sentences. So for example, in this one here, we've got highlight rows. So we're indicating row as a range. We're got a column identifier E and an operator, so less than, and there are a number of built-in entities. So in this case, we've got number, but you can also use currencies. So we can actually quite easily start building quite a sophisticated virtual agent that is able to not only understand some of the intent from the phrases that we say, but also we can start prompting the user. So if we have required parameters that we need to extract, we can actually indicate that, and through the Dialogflow web interface, we can actually start creating a more rich experience for the user. So that's kind of part one of the solution to the problem. So the second part is in the example, we included Dialogflow as part of an add-on within Google Sheets. So out of the box, Dialogflow has a number of integrations. So you can, through the web interface, you can set up connections to Slack and Facebook Messenger, Google Assistant as well, it being one of the Google products. Unfortunately, integrating in with the G Suite editors, slides, sheets, docs, and forms isn't one of the built-in integrations that Dialogflow offers. So if you understand a little bit about coding, a number of services provide APIs, and these are basically ways that you can call the service from another application and get some data back. So in the case of the example I was showing you there, we have our G Suite editor, and we use a product called Google Apps Script, which is provided by Google as part of G Suite, and we can actually use Google Apps Script to do the basically handle the recording of messages or the text input, which is then sent to Dialogflow, and Dialogflow returns the intent parameters. So there's still bits of work for us to do as developers in interpreting that intent and doing actions as a result. But Dialogflow takes a huge amount of the effort out of what we want to do. As there are a number of low coders, I'll just quickly give you a summary of Google Apps Script if it's a product that you've not come across before. So as I mentioned, it sits within G Suite. It has a number of benefits in the fact that it's serverless. So as a developer, I don't have to worry about hosting code or anything like that. It all sits in Google's cloud. And because it sits within G Suite, we're in a pre-authenticated environment. So Google knows who's logged in at the keyboard, so we don't have to worry about things like identity. So it removes some of those stumbling blocks, and so we're not having to set up libraries and so on, we can just start interacting with Google services rather rapidly. So as I mentioned, it's in the cloud. It's actually been, I mentioned at the start of the show that I've been blogging about Google Apps Script for 10 years. It's actually over 10 years old now. So it's a project that's been around for quite a while. And so if you've ever explored the tools editor in Google Sheets, you'll see it. And we've got no low-code options for using Google Apps Script now with the ability to record macros. So again, there's another avenue that you might want to go off and explore. So Google Apps Script, you can use it within a number of the G Suite editors. If you want to find out more about how conversational interfaces can be developed with Google Apps Script, there's a blog post where I basically provide more details about the initial setup for all this. So I think in terms of the architecture, I think it's relatively straightforward to do this sort of thing. So hopefully that means that we're going to see a lot more conversational interfaces appearing within the G Suite editors and beyond as well, because I think Dialogflow is really a great product to start playing around with and exploring what it can do. I think Alan Fistenberg is on the call as well. So Alan's got a slightly different approach to this. So Alan's actually been looking at how you can use Google Assistant to interact with not only G Suite, Google Sheets, but also other aspects of Google Drive. So he has a product called Voodoo Drive, and I'm sure he'll be dropping some links into the chat. So I think in terms of moving forward as well, I think there's a lot published around UX and UI, so the user experience and user interfaces. But I think within that's very much focused around visual elements. And I think when we start integrating voice, I think that's a whole other level of design to think about. You know, the mechanics of conversations, how you deal with intent that you don't understand on a programmatic level, and making sure that your user is still getting a good experience from it all. So Google have actually published some material as well to actually you can start using to help you design your dialogues, and that can feed into how you set up Dialogflow in terms of developing your virtual agents. So that's well worth a read. So I think, as I mentioned, once you could start getting into Dialogflow, there are a number of other integrations available. So even if you're not interested in developing stuff with Google Sheets, there's a lot of other, I think, useful and interesting ways that we can start using our voice to interact with the user. And just a quick plug. So if AppScript is a technology that has caught your eye, so a number of us contribute to a site called AppScript Pulse, where we actually capture use cases from the Google AppScript community, just showcasing what's possible with Google AppScript. And if you're a Google AppScript developer yourself and you want to be part of that community, we're always looking for contributors. So if you go to the website, you can sign up and help us contribute stuff as well. So, and I can see Alan has kindly put some of his links in. So thank you for that, Alan. So I'm going to pause there for a second, and hopefully I haven't. And I'll just wait for Ben, but I'll also look through the chat and see if there are any questions to pick up. Hi, Ben.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yeah,
Awesome. Thanks very much for that, Martin. That was really fascinating to see, especially that history of, the sort of accessibility,
yeah,
how the mouse came to be. And then the spreadsheet came along and it's still here and it's still the ubiquitous office tool today.
yeah.
So I've got a few questions for you, actually, that as I was listening along, I was thinking about. Um, how long do you think it is until we might all be talking to our sheets as just a normal way of interacting with them? Are we
I,
a year away, 2 years away, 10 years away? Is it?
I think given in terms of potential users, I think there's a huge marketplace potentially out there. So I think um, it's just, I think as well, the availability of data to personal individuals. So the fact that, banking data is more regularly available, and I know a number of your sponsors, have products that allow people to manage their personal expenses and income in Google Sheets, and I see that as just feeding the opportunity for something like this to really take off. And I think as well, spreadsheets are I think a wonderful tool, but there's um, it takes some investment in terms of being able to there's lots of opportunities in terms of being able to distill some of the things that experts are able to do with Google Sheets in a more approachable way to just say that you want to highlight something or move something without having to navigate umpteen menus. I think
Yeah,
it's got to be the way forward.
yeah. I like that. I think I could totally see that. You have big table of data, and if you haven't got the skills to analyze that, but you could ask your
Yeah,
spreadsheets, what's the total revenue for 2017, and it could just read the answer back to you. That would be game changing. It would open up the doors to so many more people. And I think that's the use case more so. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, Google, in cell B17, type equals query. And I don't think that's quite the
yeah.
idea with the VoIP to more people as well. So another question for you then is, do you have any resources? If someone had listened to this talk today and said, okay, I want to build a tool that's Dialogflow and AppScript and my basic sheet like Martin did, how could I get started doing that?
There's a blog post on my website where I published a link to the highlighter example, so you can see all the code.
Okay, great.
I've also produced an open source boilerplate. So it has up required in terms of in terms of processing the voice to send it into Dialogflow and setting up Dialogflow. So the Dialogflow
Picks up.
detects. The thing that is to start considering is when you're using scientific data, can it understand, alpha, beta, lambdas,
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, language is very complex
Yeah.
when you get to the edge cases.
Also, Dialogflow, I can't remember how many languages it supports, but I think it's in 20s or 30s. So it doesn't have to be in English. So, I know you've got here, Ben. So, if you want to start developing in Portuguese or Spanish, you can start doing that.
Okay, great. And folks, we'll share that link Martin mentioned to his blog post with all of the steps of how you can build this voice-activated Dialogflow Sheets example that Martin was showing today. So we'll make sure we share that link. Great. So Martin, where can people find you on the web? Just quickly before we wrap up.
So you can find me. So I'm M Hoxie on Twitter, and from that you'll find
everything else.
My blog where you'll find various kind of Google AppScript experiments and coding tips. And fortunate that my name's fairly unique. So as long as you can spell my surname, I'm very Googleable.
Googleable. I like that. Okay, great. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up, actually. So thank you very much, Martin, for that insightful presentation there. It was really interesting to see the voice activation, and I think that the dialogue flow has a little way to go with the Scottish accent. It seems like so. We'll get onto that. Great. So thank you very much, and folks, that's a wrap for today with the live talks. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a really fun day. I've really enjoyed seeing all the interaction that's been happening and all the excitement that people have had and all the things people have been learning today. So it's been a really fun experience from my side. We're back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the first opening talk. So the 10 a.m. talk is with Alex Wilson. She's a certified financial planner and Google Sheets whiz, and she's got techniques for working with financial data in Google Sheets. That's at 10 a.m. Then at 11 a.m. we have another Google developer expert, Laura Taylor, with AppScript. So getting started with AppScript and how you can automate some of those tedious tasks in G Suite. So that's going to be a great one. Then we have a network. We have David Krevitz, who's a digital marketing expert, Google Sheets expert, and he's been spending the last few years building out these really interesting data pipelines. So taking data from your digital marketing sources all the way through BigQuery into Sheets and then onto lines and working with. Come and check that one out, folks. So thank you all tomorrow, and thanks again, Martin.
My pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Well done, Ben.
Bye. It's Ben Collins. I've been organizing SheetsCon here today, and with me on stage